All right, so today we're talking about a story about the day a decision was made, but not the kind of decision you might think. This wasn't about giving up on a dream, no. It was about finally stopping the run from a fear. This is the story of a young man named Arham and the day he finally found his voice.
You know that feeling, right? Where your heart just starts hammering against your ribs so hard, you're positive everyone around you can hear it? Well, that's exactly where our story kicks off. Because for Arham, that overwhelming anxiety, it wasn't just some fleeting feeling. It was his reality every single time he had to speak. So Arham's story really begins in this place he saw as a prison. And no, I'm not talking about one with actual iron bars. This was a prison built from his own fear, a place where the silence around him was just deafeningly loud with the noise of his own self-doubt. I mean, think about it. In school, you've got the smart kid, the jock, the class clown. Arham, he was just the quiet one. He was basically invisible. And look, being quiet isn't a bad thing, but it's not exactly peaceful when it's not your choice. For Arham, that quietness, it was a cage built by this absolute terror of being noticed, of having to actually use his voice. And look, his biggest fears weren't some rare life or death situations. Not at all. We're talking about the most normal, everyday school stuff. Things like class presentations, group discussions, even something as simple as reading a single paragraph out loud. For literally everyone else, it was just another Tuesday. But for Arham, it was absolute torture. So picture this. The teacher announces a simple 2-minute speech. The classroom kind of buzzes, right? You get the usual mix of groans and a few kids who are excited. But for Arham, a cold dread just washed over him. I mean, 2 minutes, it doesn't sound like a long time, does it? But for him, it might as well have been an eternity. It was a war. And yeah, that war, it was pretty much lost before it even began. He makes that long walk to the front of the class, and the whole room suddenly feels massive. His hands are shaking so badly, the paper in them is trembling. He opens his mouth to speak, and nothing. Just absolute silence. His own silence. And then you hear it, the quiet little giggles from the back of the room. He just turned around and walked back to his seat, devastated. And in that moment, that's the devastating conclusion he came to. Something inside of him just broke. He started telling himself this lie. I'm not made for big things. And you know what they say, right? If you repeat a lie to yourself enough times, it starts to feel like the absolute truth. But what if your lowest moment, what if that's actually just the beginning of your real story? Because later that same evening, feeling completely defeated, Arham found himself on a rooftop. And a single conversation up there, well, it was about to change absolutely everything. So his older sister, Ariba, she finds him up there. And he asks her, what is courage? In his mind, it was simple. Courage just meant not being scared. But her answer, it completely flipped his world upside down. She told him that courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about being terrified and still standing there anyway. And then she followed it up with this one simple sentence. And these words of belief from his sister, they were the spark. It was literally the first time he ever considered that maybe, just maybe, that lie he'd been telling himself wasn't the truth after all. And look, this wasn't some big, heroic movie moment. There was no triumphant music. It was just a small, quiet, private decision he made that night. He decided he wasn't going to quit. Instead, he was going to practice. Alone, where no one could see him fail. All right, so this next phase of the story, it isn't glorious at all. This is the messy part. The difficult, internal battle. This is the part of the journey that happens behind closed doors, when you're just facing yourself in the mirror, long before you can ever think about facing the world. And let me tell you, it was brutal. The first time he tried, standing in front of that mirror, he couldn't even last 30 seconds. He was just overwhelmed with hating his voice, his face, everything. He almost gave up, right then and there. But then he remembered what his sister said, and he forced himself to try again. And then again, and again. Okay, so fast forward a few months. A city-level speech competition gets announced, and immediately a war just breaks out inside his head. You've got the old fear on one side whispering, remember what happened last time. But now, there's a new voice, a stronger voice, and it fires back, that was the old you. And with that,
He walked right up and wrote his name on the sign-up sheet.
And so, here we are, the final test. We're talking a huge auditorium, bright lights, hundreds of faces staring back at him. But this time, this wasn't about giving some perfect, flawless speech. No. This was about finally delivering an honest one.
So he's backstage just moments away from going on, and it all comes rushing back. The sweaty palms, the dry throat, that crushing weight on his chest, and that thought, it was right there, just screaming at him. You can still walk away. Just leave. No one expects you to do this. You can still run. But then, he remembered that boy on the rooftop who almost gave up, and he just whispered this to himself. It was a promise, a command. Not today. In that moment, he was finally choosing to stand his ground.
And when he walked out onto that stage, he didn't give some polished, memorized speech. He gave an honest one. He talked about fear itself. He talked about that urge to just run away. He talked about what it feels like to believe you're small, and about all those quiet battles that nobody ever sees. And you know what happened? The entire auditorium went silent. People were really, truly listening.
So after all of that, what was the official result? Well, he got second place. Just a number on a scoreboard. And for a moment, that's all anyone really saw. But you and I know that trophy didn't matter, right? The real victory wasn't coming in second place. The real win was defeating that voice inside his head that kept screaming, "You can't." Honestly, he'd already won. He won the moment he decided to stop running. And that right there is the core lesson from his entire journey. Believing in yourself, it doesn't mean you never have doubts. Not at all. It means you act even when you doubt. It's about choosing to move forward when every single instinct in your body is telling you to just stay put. You know, Arham's story was about public speaking, sure, but the battle he fought, that's universal. We all have that. So it really just leaves us with one final question to think about. What is the biggest battle going on inside your mind? And are you ready to stop running?